Hey, thanks for vamping for us. Gus, got Bernie, and we got Jake Solomon here, who's working on XCOM 2 to tell us all about the new announcements you have in store.
Anthony, I love your shirt, by the way.
It's a great
Bernie,
shirt.
I love you for saying so, buddy.
I ate in many 80s themed diners when I was a kid. So it's,
I feel that this is my extra in Back to the Future 2 ensemble today.
this is the Back to the Future version of what 2017 was going to be like. That's
exactly.
What
I rode
is.
in on a Mattel hoverboard.
Just
this
the
morning.
80s started and never stopped. They
Never.
just kept going and got bigger and better.
All right, enough of that.
Sorry, guys.
I want to talk about XCOM 2.
It's a pretty sweet shirt.
XCOM 2 is...
In fact, we're going to put that in the game.
Are
That's
you-
our biggest announcement.
XCOM canon, baby.
Soldier
Confirmed
customization.
DLC. Anthony Carboni.
Everyone will be
Carboni shirt.
They'll
Yeah.
constily be recalibrating their monitors,
right.
trying to figure out what's wrong.
That
some
could
kind of-
not be right. They,
There's some
did,
kind of
they
weird
couldn't have
graphic
intended
glitch.
that.
Yeah. It doesn't render the shirt. I don't know what's wrong.
I completed a mission, everyone survived, and that's what I unlocked?
Yeah.
Was this shirt?
Okay, so it seems like the War of the Chosen expansion is huge,
Yeah.
but it also seems like it brings some pretty core changes to the way that the game itself is going to play. What was the goal, I guess, in making these changes? What's the goal in pushing this update out?
Yeah, I think that the original goal there were two. One, we wanted to make something massive. We wanted to add tons of content to the game. And XCOM 2 was already big, but we really wanted to make this feel like a very different experience when you played. But another part of it is adding personality, because I think that the game whenever you're making expansion, you're kind of looking for holes. You're kind of looking for, hey, where could we add? What could we do better? And I thought like being able to add actual personalities to the game, I think would be something we've never done before, and that's why we added the Chosen, who are these three distinct characters, and they have distinct personalities, and so they will talk to the player. So when you're fighting them, they'll be talking to you about how their last fight against you went, how the other Chosen are doing, things you've done in the past, and they'll comment on the weapons you're using, and then they'll talk to you outside of combat, and they have these big personalities. And then we've also added resistance factions, which add a whole bunch of new classes that the player can use. And they also have personalities. And so you have these voices, and even to the point where when you're coming back from a mission on the dropship, you can hear like radio broadcast from the government that controls Earth, and they're trying to spin what you just did, and in sort of a comedic way. They're trying to spin what you just did and say, don't worry, it's a minor, reactor explosion, and nobody was hurt. And then when you go back to the base, and you can go to the bar in the base, and we actually have Jake Busey is actually our radio DJ.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, oh yeah, and he plays this crazy over-the-top resistance DJ, and so he's spinning everything you just did for the player. And so you get all these different voices talking, and all of a sudden XCOM, it's a strategy game, it's a tactics game, but it really like comes alive because we've added like real characters to it, and it makes it feel more warm, and it's fun as a player.
So in the past, the way that I always tried to add character myself in the past was I'd always try to name my squad mates, my friends and my coworkers. We still be able to do that, have our own custom names, our custom build on our squad.
Yeah, you're right. So there's two sides to the story, right? There's the sort of directed cinematic story when we've added to that. But even more important for us for these kinds of games is the player story. Like what is the story you tell because of the experiences you went through, who your soldiers are. I do the same thing. I customize my soldiers. Mine is mostly like modern hip hop, so I've got this like modern hip hop squad with me and my wife and my brother. And an element we've added to that is that soldiers can actually form relationships now. So
Yeah, bonds.
Yeah, so soldiers are compatible, and it's random. You start a game, you come back from a mission, and it'll tell you like, hey, these two soldiers are really compatible. These two soldiers are not compatible. And then if you take compatible soldiers on missions together, they'll develop this cohesion, and then at some point, you can go in, the camera will zoom in, they're in the base, they're like drinking beer together, they're shooting guns together, soldier stuff, and it'll say like, hey, these soldiers can form a bond now. And so if you form a bond, they get all these free abilities in combat, and you can form like multiple levels of a bond. And so yeah, if you do customize your character, it gets tricky because all of a sudden, for example, your brother will be really compatible with your wife, but you won't be, and that's really weird, and so you have to start the game over.
Well, it sounds like one soldier's not going to last very long.
That's right.
So I had a good run with you, brother.
Why don't you go kick in that door?
Yeah.
Right. I had that happen actually. Kanye formed a relationship. He was like forming a bond with my wife, and I was like,
He's
"Come
the
on."
worst when it comes to that.
I know.
He's just-
So I played a mission, and he actually got killed. And normally I'd reload, but I was like, no. I was like,
but then you got to
mine.
nurse your wife through the heartbreak. and
That's right.
everything.
That's
It's
right.
tough.
Yeah, your bondmates. If your bondmates die, they go berserk, and so yeah, it's this really neat system that just adds this extra layer of storytelling to the game.
Gus, not to make this too personal or anything, but did you ever
Go
name
on.
a character after me?
Oh yeah, of course.
How'd I do?
You're the best at kicking down the door and getting shot in the face.
That's exactly how I
You know
play at
what?
home. So yeah,
You're good. You're best at something, right?
That's right.
The best
Yeah.
at being a bullet
hey,
sponge.
it's important to reveal where the enemies are.
That's
sometimes-
right.
Sometimes
That's
you gotta
right.
get shot in the face for that to happen.
Send them in.
Can a soldier be bonded to more than one soldier at a time?
No, what kind of freaky
I'm
game do you
just
think
saying.
we're? I don't judge.
2017.
I'm not judging if people want to bond to multiple. No, the bonds are simply 1-to-1. So
Okay.
Like a battle buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got their battle buddy. We at one point there was like a zone you could be in, and we started calling it like the buddy zone, and then we were like, this is too weird. But yeah, like it really creates a lot of you just get even more invested in these two pairs. You always want to send bonded soldiers together, so
Right.
yeah, it's a fun little feature.
Which is a big part of the game. As you run different missions, you have to go into your roster.
That's right.
And in previous iterations of XCOM, it was how deep did you go with people who didn't have enough experience or weren't,
Right.
powered up enough. But now there's a different element where you might be able to send one person from a bonded pair in. And that's a bigger risk because if you lose that soldier, you lose that bond.
That's right, and they don't get all the free abilities. If their bondmate was there, they get all these free abilities because their buddy is there. And you have a much bigger roster in War of the Chosen because now soldiers, they can get wounded. If they go on multiple missions back to back, they get tired.
Yep.
And so you've got to rotate out this bigger roster. And you can send tired soldiers, but if you send tired soldiers, they can actually pick up, like, again, this is another storytelling, but they can pick up these quirky traits. And so all of a sudden, your soldier will come back, and you sent them in tired, and they come back, and they're like, okay, they pick up this new personality, which is aggressive. And that means you put them in a mission, you tell them to go on Overwatch, which is wait, don't attack yet. If you tell them that and then there's an enemy there, they'll be like, nah, that's okay, I'm just going to shoot them instead.
Yeah.
Or somebody likes to obsessively reload their gun. So if you're running somebody around who's obsessive, and their gun isn't fully reloaded, they may ignore what you just told them and reload their gun on you. And so it just creates these moments you're like, for God's sake. And it just creates this personality in your characters. And so, again, it's another little storytelling element.
It's like me playing an FPS, just constantly reloading.
That's right. That's
Shot
right.
one bullet, better reload.
Yeah.
Reload after a kill for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you talked about like what the perks do exactly with bonded soldiers? Like what kinds of things that people can benefit from?
Yeah, and so XCOM, it's turn-based, and so the idea is that your buddies, they can basically trade abilities. So you can say, I'm going to give up an ability to give you an extra action, and so basically you can let your buddy take 2 actions in a turn, but you have to give up your own turn. And so they sort of make each other, they make them more efficient. There are abilities where if they're freaking out, because in XCOM, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, sometimes bad things happen.
Yep.
Soldiers panic, you shoot your squad mates. It happens to all of us. And then when that occurs, if soldiers are panicking, if they're somehow stunned or knocked out, if their bond mate comes and stands next to them, that'll just completely remove any negative mental effects. So,
Okay.
it's like
Is
a
that
shoulder.
the only bond mate perk that you get that's proximity based?
Well, no, you get bonuses for being next to each other. If you guys are targeting the same target, you get bonuses for that. At the highest level, you both attack the same target at the exact same time, and it doesn't cost your buddy anything. So, again, it gets more and more powerful. So, yeah, the bonds is like it becomes very powerful. But, of course, you have to invest time. You have to make sure they're going on missions together and all of that.
I like the idea also, like you talked about, how there's a bar back at the base where they can like hang out and drink and shoot guns.
They're always together. Those are the kind of silly little things that I love. So that when you go in your base, your bond mates, they'll always be together. They'll be talking, or they'll be looking at a computer monitor. We even have this new feature that I love. Okay, so this feature is called the photo booth. What this is basically a propaganda generator. So at the end of every mission, when you win, all of a sudden the game will take all your soldiers, they'll throw them together, they'll pose them all in a bunch of random poses, soldier poses, everybody will be pointing, aiming their gun, and then it'll generate a phrase about your squad like, the heroes of New Mexico, join the resistance today. And the player can completely change that. They can write their own text, they can put filters over it, they can pose their soldiers however they want, rotate them around. So you make these you know, obviously you can move the camera all around, so you're generating your own propaganda posters. And then when you do that, when you go on missions, you'll now see those posters plastered on the sides of walls.
Oh, that's great.
And they're up in the base, and
So in levels, when you're playing, those posters will be there?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's great.
Oh, yeah. So all the propaganda you're generating will then start appearing throughout the world. It's like this really fun element of, you know, creating your own propaganda, and you just feel like you're kind of affecting the world.
I feel like that's also the kind of thing that's easily shareable on social as well. People will be, you know, posting their squad online, like on Twitter or whatever social media platform,
That's
showing off.
Exactly. And it recognizes, oh, are you posing two bond mates together? Then it will say, like, hey, you know, they're all out of bubble gum or whatever it is. You know, they generate phrases for, oh, these are bond mates. It's a solo soldier. Like, it recognizes what you're trying to do, and it sort of auto-generates these posters. And then, of course, you can customize it however you want. And, yeah, it spits out high-res images that everybody, you know, can share.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So I want to talk a little bit, something we haven't really touched on is, based on the trailer and what I've seen so far, I want to learn a little more about The Lost. And how they play into the story. Because it seems, from what I can see, it seems like it's a new, almost like zombified human type, or what's going on there?
Yes, yes. And so the idea is that, you know, the aliens, they invaded 20 years ago. They destroyed some of our cities, and we haven't been back. And so in War of the Chosen, the player takes missions in these abandoned cities, and when you go back there, what you find are these Lost. So instead of fighting, you know, 5 or 6 enemies, the Lost are huge swarms, and so they come in these huge swarms of mutated humans, and so the player has to sit there, and all of a sudden you have to be really careful about who it is you're taking down, because you're fighting 15 enemies. And the interesting thing about them is that they also will fight the aliens, so they'll fight both of you. So you're sitting there, you're fighting the aliens, you're being very strategic. And then all of a sudden the Lost come swarming in because they're drawn to the sound of combat, these big swarms. So if you start throwing grenades, you're just going to get a bunch of Lost flowing in. They'll attack the aliens, they'll attack you, and so you kind of have to pause combat as you're both trying to, like, just survive. So it creates a very chaotic, in a fun way, very chaotic, very different feel to the game.
Gotta be careful. You might bond with an alien during one of those moments, and then you're really screwed.
That's right.
Yeah.
You see the eyes meet across the battlefield.
You get a mental mind control connection.
I didn't think we actually have there's a new soldier class that is a half alien, half human hybrid. So yeah, they've defected from the alien army, and they can actually join XCOM now. So it's a class called the Skirmishers. And so yeah, we've actually made that sort of mating, bonding, yeah. No, it's
hybridization.
Hybrid. Let's stick to hybrid. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say, even like in the narrative, the aliens invaded 20 years ago, but the franchise has been around for 20, 25 years at this point.
Right. That's right.
So it's almost like it's in real time. And the series, like what you're talking about, with, you know, all these iterations of the game, you're able to refine the gameplay, and then these elements like bonds between the different soldiers. It's like the franchise just comes so far.
It has, and in fact, the other day, 2 days ago, I went to lunch with the original creator of XCOM.
Really?
Yeah, he's a guy I look up to a lot, and, you know, we have a great relationship. We'll share things, because he's still making games, you know, now, and so we'll share ideas, and we'll still talk, and it is crazy, because, you know, I said, like, here you are at E3. It's 20 years on, you know, and it's just really neat to sort of be a part of this whole big, long legacy. And yeah, it is very different from the beginning, but obviously we still have that same soul.
And is it when you're designing new characters for, you know, this DLC in particular, is there a lot of pressure? Because, I mean, some of these enemies you face have been in the game for 25 years.
Yeah. There's always pressure. I mean, I think that it's true. It's pressure to be honest to the franchise, and even more than that, making sure that you're doing something. You know, at a certain point, when your game has like a number after it, you know, you get into 2 or whatever, then the audience becomes the most important owner of the title. You know, it's theirs, and they're going to let you know what it is they like, and you're only here because they've liked what you've done before, but you make sure and stay honest by them, stay true by them. And so every time you're designing something, you have to take into consideration, you know, all right, is this are people going to like this? Is this going to add to the game in a way that people are going to like? So, yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine. I'm fine.
But you have a lot of devs on the staff now, I assume, that also have played the game for years themselves.
Yes.
Grew up playing the game.
It's in our DNA. It really is in our DNA. And that's when you feel free to take new direction with it, is when you feel like you're so steeped in it that you don't have to stick true to what's come before. You now feel free to sort of go in new directions.
Yeah,
and I was gonna say, and I think that's something that you've done really well with this franchise, like going from enemy unknown to enemy within, like not being afraid to really change things. And even like what I've seen so far, War of the Chosen, really like kind of tweaking and changing the way XCOM 2 is going to work. And as a fan, I really appreciate the constant fresh innovation on it.
I think that's what, you really got to, if you want to ask people for their hard-earned dollars, you got to be willing to say, like, I got to take a chance here, do something different, change the way it plays. You don't want to give somebody the same old thing. And this definitely isn't just adding more of the same on top. It was kind of our goal to say, okay, let's take this and twist this in lots of new directions.
Sure.
Cool. Well,
I mean, which is, I think, is true to XCOM 2 itself as a game, is because there was such a change in the narrative of becoming the resistance now in the world to the established government. So
So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is definitely one of the games I'm most excited about coming out of E3. So
awesome. Thank you guys for having me.